Hi everyone, my name is Ravi Agrawal. I'm the editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine and the host of FP Live, and I want to welcome all of you for joining us here, and also a warm welcome to our live stream audience watching this around the world, live and later on demand. So this is a session titled Defending the Cyber Frontlines. There are many conflicts, of course, going on around the world right now, and a crucial component of that is the cyber domain, whether it's cyber biothreats, attacks on critical infrastructure, disruptions to supply chains. It's safe to say that we need better rules, we need better systems and safeguards to make sure that for all the advances we're making in connecting the world, it doesn't get out of hand. Let me quickly introduce our terrific panel here. Andrius Kubilius is the European Commissioner for Space and Defense. He served as Prime Minister of Lithuania as well. Mariana Egger is the President of the ICRC, the Red Cross. To her left, Joe Kaiser is the chairman of Siemens Energy. To his left, Matthew Prince, the CEO of Cloudflare. And finally, Samir Saran, the president of ORF, a think tank in India. Matthew, let me start with you. At Cloudflare, you have a bird's eye view of how companies operate. Just give us a quick sense of how geopolitics and tensions there are affecting how companies are thinking about security.
Absolutely. So Cloudflare's, our mission is to help build a better internet, and a big part of that is security. A huge percentage of the internet sits behind Cloudflare, and every day we're stopping over 220 billion attacks against our customers. And so we absolutely are on the front lines of seeing what's going on. And what I can say is that whenever there is conflict in the political space, whether that's kinetic war or even just conflict within nations, we almost always see cyber conflict follow along with that. And so whatever you're seeing in the pictures on the news, know that in cyberspace, a war is raging at the exact same time.
And so global conflict has increased, physical terms, so cyber has increased alongside it.
That's absolutely correct. And so when we saw in 2022 Russia invade Ukraine, unfortunately ahead of that, back in December of 2021, we were already seeing the cyber conflict start, where there was probing and other things which we were able to detect and then look at and warn the Ukrainians, and fortunately be able to get in front of a lot of their critical infrastructure and protect them, make sure they could stay online. As we see conflict in Israel and Gaza, similar things happen where both sides are actually launching attacks at each other's infrastructure in order to disable their communication systems and make it so that they can't get their message and their story out to the rest of the world. So cyber is definitely one of the critical aspects of conflict around the world, and we see it go hand in hand with any kinetic conflict which is going on that we might see in the news.
Joe, similarly, you were CEO of Siemens for many years. Now you're chairman of Siemens Energy. Just sketch out quickly how you see businesses having to change their strategy because of cyber attacks.
Well, look, I mean, the whole cyberspace is opportunity and threat altogether for us as a company, all three of them. And I mean, opportunity because we are acting critical infrastructure. So that means, customers, utilities, they come to us and say, can you help us protect the grid? Can you help us protect, the turbines and what have a supply chain? So there's opportunity to do some business out of that. But it's a threat because we are obviously, supplying critical infrastructure. We are the target because we are very early in the value chain. So we've been stepping up our efforts quite a lot, also, by the help of colleagues like Cloudflare. So it's a constant struggle, and I'm afraid we are only at the beginning.
Mariana, wherever there is conflict, the Red Cross tends to be there. How has cyber changed your operations in the last decade or so?
In a very dominating way. There's no conflict where cyber doesn't play an important role, and this is also the reason why we spend so much time with it. There are cyber operations that target civilian infrastructure, and that has a huge impact on the humanitarian fallout that comes with conflict. They attack energy, water, hospitals, health facilities, but they also attack communication systems. Or sometimes communication systems are disabled to prevent cyber attacks, which has an impact on the protection of civilians because they rely on information to know where their family members are, to know where to evacuate and to know where they can possibly be safe. So if you deactivate communication, you harm the civilians that are already under threat. And then last but not least, we are under attack as the International Committee of the Red Cross. We undergo daily cyber attacks that we have to protect ourselves from, and this is why we partner with non-profit organizations, private sector companies that help us employ the technology that we need in order to protect our data, our personnel, etc.
So we've sketched out the problems. I'm going to push us all towards solutions now. Commissioner Kubilius, let me bring you in here. There are two components really that I want to push you on. One, how do governments improve their defenses? And then two, how do you then build norms and rules that they actually follow?
Well, thanks a lot. Yes, I have this responsibility, Commissioner for Defense and Space, and it touches also, of course, cybersecurity, not just, military things. I can tell you that in my so-called mission letter, which, all of us as commissioners we got on the first days, I have a lot of tasks on defense, on space, but also I have the task to develop so-called defense projects of common European interest, starting from air defense shield, and next one is cyber defense shield. So it means that, on European Union level in Commission, we understand very well what are the threats. I can tell you, just cyber attacks since the end of 23 till, during the whole 24 year, registered cyber incidents, the number is around of 11,000 in European Union. Next, of course, we see that, there are not only cyber attacks, but also attacks on communications, on communication cables, telecommunication cables, internet communication cables, like in Baltic Sea, in other places. So we see all those threats in a very clear picture. Now, what we can do as European Union, as Commission, of course, we can, try to convince member states to be, better prepared, because of course, cyber defense goes on national level. And yes, we are introducing, standards through our regulations, standards both on security of electronic equipment and on security of institutions, how they need to defend themselves. It's symbolic that the first document which we approved in the new Commission was exactly devoted to cybersecurity of hospitals in the European Union, because that is what we see as a threat. Second, of course, what we are trying to do is to create systems of coordination, which would allow us to better survey what is happening, to have systems which would allow member states and institutions to exchange information on, in order to prevent spread of some attacks. And the last one, really, what we can, what we are attempting to do is to create special, what we call rapid reaction teams, which would help, member states if they are under threat.
Samir, one of the strange things about the world right now is there's a general sense of impunity. Countries feel like they can test the boundaries of international law and get away with it. There's also a sense that, well, everyone has their own double standards, so why do the rules matter anyway? You add in cyber here, and it feels like the Wild West. What should we do?
No, so, for example, the commissioner was, in some ways, trying to respond to your question about norms and rules. Those norms exist. We have a UNGGE that many years ago agreed that thou shalt not attack critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
We shall not undermine facilities like you just listed. And yet we worry about them, and yet everyone follows them in breach.
Right.
So in a sense, every enterprise, for-profit, non-profit, social enterprise, essential enterprise, everything is fair game today. And in some sense, the cyber front lines are universal. everyone, including you and me, are part of that front line, and we are under threat today. And let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
There is nothing that Commissioner can do, or you can do, or I can do. We are all fair game. Businesses are fair game. In fact, let me just tell you that the day the American and Europeans decided to cancel business operations and media operations and digital operations in Russia, they have in fact ensured that those businesses are seen as adversaries. So in some sense, they are no longer transnational corporations. They are corporations that serve a side, that serve a side to a conflict, and they are all open to attacks, and they are all open to to being targeted in some sense. So that's a very interesting space we are in. But second point, I think 5 years ago, if we were having this conversation, and I remember Matthew and we were all in a room some years ago, we were worrying about the weaponization of cyberspace and cyber weapons. We were worrying about two things: that weaponization of the space and the cyber weapons that governments are developing and non-state actors are developing. Those weapons are out there now. In the last 4 years, we have seen a spectacular deployment of cyber weapons. In fact, dramatically advertised by blowing up pagers, using manipulation of systems by the Israel agencies in their Middle East operations. Yeah. We have seen, Stuxnet looks mild when the Americans melted the Iranian reactor using, the first big cyber virus that was spread through, conventional means. It looks mild compared to what we have seen Ukrainians do in Russia, aided and abetted by Western sophisticated technologies. So in many ways, all those cyber weapons that we were worried would come out into the open are out there. And once you have used them against adversary, remember, some of them did not work. And those become prototypes for further development by now non-state actors and commercial actors to actually build really credible interference tools, and then add AI to it. And amateurs with AI are cyber soldiers. Amateurs plus AI is equal to a real cyber soldier, and I think about that.
This always happens at Davos, by the way. When we push towards solutions, we present more problems. So I'm going to hold us to it, but Matthew, jump in.
I would say, though, that I think the big puzzle of the last 3 years, I was on a panel about 3 years ago, right as the Ukrainian-Russian conflict was exploding. And I predicted that we were going to see a massive increase in cyber attacks. And what surprised me is it hasn't happened. And the question is why? And I think part of it is that there is a little bit of fear that once you use it, it's gone. And secondly, once you use the weapon, then it's very hard to use it again. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is there's a bit of fear, I think, at least among the Russians, of sort of a old nuclear concern, which is there's a mutually assured destruction. The Russian infrastructure is every bit, if not more, vulnerable to cyber attacks. And the fear is that, in fact, there's been less attacks against the US than there have against some much smaller countries in Europe. And the question, again, is why? And I think that, again, this fear of mutually assured destruction, that if the Russians launched larger attacks against the US, that the US would be very capable of coming back and shutting down the Russian infrastructure. I think that's what's held this.
I think there's the deterrence effect that's happened here. But look, I was very careful. I said Ukrainian attacks on Russia. I never said Russian attacks on Western targets. It's actually Russia who's been at the receiving end. I'm just worried that when you are throwing weapons at the Russians, and you think that, we have kind of pinned them in a cyber corner, they are collecting all those weapons. They are also learning. And what I'm trying to say is you're building an adversarial arsenal that at some point will be innovated upon and deployed. So we have not seen the end of this.
Well, and I think that the place to look to that is the most worrying is the series of sort of the typhoon attacks, the Salt Typhoon and other attacks that China has placed, which are the first time I have seen. Typically, Chinese cyber attacks have been about taking intellectual property. These are attacks where it is not clear what the underlying purpose is. It appears that they are front positioning themselves for something in the future. Putting themselves into telecommunications infrastructure in order to, if there has to be a conflict in the future. And again, I think that is probably the most worrying trend that I've seen over the last 3 years, whereas I would have predicted it would be much more around what we've seen in the Ukraine-Russia.
I want to pick up on just one part of that, Joe, with you. The point that Samir raised about companies seen as having taken sides. Are you finding that, if you pull out of, let's say, Russia, that you're fair game in a way that you wouldn't have been before?
Well, look, yeah, it always depends on what the country and the issue is. I want to come back to something else, which goes into the similar direction. Stuxnet. One of the most worrisome topics, I believe, for private sector companies, if you get into friendly fire. If you get into friendly fire, if your products, your services are being used by state actors to do something what they believe is good. Stuxnet, they cracked our source code for the PLC. And
Digital controllers were
compromised. We knew who it was because we were looking at the map and saw when the actors were trying to edit the code. And so we saw from a time difference that it was a concerted action between East Coast and somewhere Red Sea area. And then the good news was it took them almost 4 days to crack our source code. So that was good for us because we knew that's a safe thing to do. But the issue was, that PLC was not just part of a less critical component in the nuclear power plant. It was also on the cooling system. Now think about it. A Siemens device, will eventually be reported responsible for a nuclear meltdown.
Wow.
And
then I was you at the time. I was obviously when we knew sort of what's going on, So I went to that special embassy in Berlin. And I said, look, talk to the ambassador. I said, look, this is not going to be a good idea. So next time, wouldn't you want to maybe tell us? We'd be happy to help you.
Right.
But this is a bad idea. And he said, oh, well, we don't know what you're talking about. Is there anything else I can help you with? And I said, okay, thank you very much.
Anyways, the hilarious thing was that
this is a real issue, this friendly fire.
India and Indonesia were the most affected country by the Stuxnet virus. They were all upgrading their systems post that attack because Siemens digital controllers, PLCs, were being deployed and used extensively in these countries. So I'm just telling you the...
Yeah. So there's an interesting component here.
Everywhere.
Just to take the idea of deterrence, and with nuclear weapons, the game of deterrence is a game for big players, and that's why it creates a world of haves and have-nots. But Mariana, what about the have-nots? If you don't have deterrence, then how do you survive in a world where you're not able to stop anyone from acting against you because you have nothing to act back with?
Based on the destruction and the experiences and the total destruction that we also saw during the Second World War, states came together and created the so-called Geneva Conventions in 1949, introducing principles like distinction and proportionality, because the majority of states don't have that self-defense potential through weapon systems that only a handful have. So they rely on the universal agreement, and all states ratified these agreements, that there will be a distinction between private and public and official and non-official and civilians and weapons bearers. Now, this comes under threat with the new technologies, because what we see now, especially in the context of Ukraine, Russia, but also in the Middle East increasingly, is the blurring of the lines, the impossibility to apply a distinction between civilians and armies or defense systems, because you have the so-called hackers, or you have civilians through app systems that come in support of armies. So are they part of the weapons bearers, or are they still civilians enjoying the specific protections? And similarly, what you call friendly fire, we call the blurring of the lines also for the private sector, because if your services are actively employed, and if parts of your company support certain of these actions conducted by civilians, you de facto also get drawn into a conflict and lose the protective mechanisms that were created. And that states still apply to, at least to a certain extent. And that's your only guarantee, because there's no world police. There's no superpower going to shield you unless it's the law.
Yeah, well, there's not even an understanding that a cyber attack is a crime. And you will probably never get that trained understanding, because the state actors are mutually adverse to such a thing. But that should be a general set of rules. Cyber attack is a crime. That would be a good start. Then a set of rules, how we manage that, would be another way. And one of the single most relevant topics to us in the private sector is, we don't find enough good people to help us in that space. I mean, of course, we've got companies. Yeah, it's one of the single biggest issues on the whole cyber topic is to find qualified people to help us defend our company and our customers' assets. And so, therefore, not talking solutions, maybe we need to pep up, education on that area to help us with more qualified people, so that we understand what questions we need to ask for the experts to help us. Because if you don't give them, what you need to achieve, it's very hard to find a solution.
Well, for everyone on live stream, Joe Kaiser is hiring. Commissioner, this blurring
50,000 people.
50,000 people, okay.
Cyber warriors.
There you go.
Next 3 years, not all on cyber.
This is WEF meets LinkedIn. Commissioner, this de-blurring of, the blurring of the lines that Mariana was pointing out, how do you reimpose the lines? And again, in a world where even in physical wars, the lines are blurred, and we know where they are in conflicts everywhere.
Well, first of all, really skills are, as we understand, big challenge everywhere. I hear, from complaints from defense industry, from space industry, that there is lack of qualified people, and that's why Commission President Ursula von der Leyen created Vice President position for skills, because that is in Europe. It looks like it's becoming a big problem now on blurring the lines. I think that still I'm defense commissioner. I'm looking into some kind of this defense logic. But I see really an issue for us, at least, my generation, maybe my, sons and my grandkids, they understand in a different way. But still, we are living, when we are talking about defense, in some way in the 20th century, understanding. Defense means, you need to have tanks, artillery, and so on and so on, which is really not the case anymore. I don't know how much you were following, developments and discussions among experts of defense since Crimea occupation. At that time, it was very popular to speak about so-called Gerasimov doctrine, Russian military offensive doctrine, which was created by their, top general, and which speaks about very simple things that, in 21st century, the war and offensive will be, in some way, what we can call total. I mean, it starts from very simple things, from propaganda, from, influence on social media, then, all the sabotage acts, cyber attacks, and it ends, with real military things. So for Russians in there, at least what I understand, for them there is no difference in between of different tools which they are using, in this what is called new generation warfare. So my point is very simple. If there is, new generation warfare, we need to have new generation defense. Which means that, again, we need to take everything, into account. Sometimes I'm complaining that, well, maybe our education from 20th century, makes us, to look into, for us, it's easier to see how we can defend ourselves against conventional war. When we're talking about, either cyber attacks or propaganda attacks, it's much more difficult to see what instruments, we can use in order to defend ourselves. That's an issue. That's an issue what we're talking here, and I agree absolutely, that really deterrence is crucial. The question is, what kind of means we can have for deterrence. And here again, the benefit is to try to look for solutions in a collective way.
So on that, I'm going to take us away from the cyber domain for 1 minute, and then we'll come back to cyber. Europeans often talk about alliances and partnerships. You just did. The United States is always the elephant in the room, and this week especially so. What happens if Trump actually tries to invade Greenland? I mean, what happens to that relationship? This is exactly your domain. So how would you respond?
Well, it's, how to say.
Is there an Article 5?
I will ask Commissioner to answer that question. We still did not discuss some kind of those issues, but, first of all, of course, we are following, and Denmark is part of European Union, and of course, as we understand, they have some kind of conversations, and, we shall support always Denmark. That's not the case, because what we need to see in a real way, not like Greenland, issue, but when we're talking about, defense, we need to see two time frames. One is urgent, which is related with Russian war against Ukraine and what can come, and there are a lot of predictions that, Russia can be ready.
Respectfully, you're dodging the question, but are you taking it seriously, the threat?
Out of the syllabus, Ravi.
Yeah, out of the syllabus, but are you taking the threat seriously?
Threat which one?
Trump's.
No, I see Trump, for example, his recent statements on Russia as very important and very strong. So, I don't know how he'll play.
But the argument of Greenland was also very strong. So what's the
Thank you for saying that.
Let's wait for actions.
Okay. Let's bring us back to cyber, as promised. Matthew, when you hear there's a skills gap, there's on the government side a real sense of call for new tools to be able to combat what's coming at them. How do you fill those gaps?
So I think the first thing is, and we've always thought this is important, that public-private partnerships make a ton of sense. We have the people with the skills to be able to defend, and that's why we provide our services at no cost to organizations like the Red Cross. We provide our services at no cost through what we call the Athenian Project to protect democracies, both in the United States and increasingly around the rest of the world. And we think that that's actually part of our mission. One of the things I think is a challenge for us is there's a real tension between sort of the idea of digital sovereignty and the idea of a collective defense. So for instance, a lot of countries around the world are saying, we want to be able to defend ourselves, we don't want to rely on anyone else. And I'll give an example in the US, which is the US has a series of requirements that if you're protecting government, that the machines, the physical hardware that protects the government has to be resident inside the United States, has to be managed by US citizens. On the surface, that makes some sense, but I sat down and I said, okay, so we get a giant denial of service attack, gets launched out of China. You want me to import that into the United States before I stop it, as opposed to stopping it out at the edge of the network, stopping it out where we are. And to the US's credit, they're like, yeah, you're right, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But as I see around the world, more and more countries say, we're gonna go our own way, we're only gonna use our own national systems, that makes cyber defense much harder, because at the end of the day, whoever has the most data, whoever has the most information is the one who wins in these conflicts. And so cooperation, cross-global, between public and private organizations is absolutely critical if we're going to defeat the enemies here.
But of course, we're more fragmented than we've been in decades globally. Samir, just pushing us towards some solutions in the last few minutes we have. If you were to recommend countries and the corporate sector as well to adopt a few steps to be better prepared for cyber attacks, what would they be?
I think Matthew's got it right. I would just have one variation. You're not defending democracy. let's not try and mix 50 things into a very simple task in front of us, which is to protect our digital infrastructure and digital society. So it doesn't matter what kind of community you come from, everyone is entitled to the same standard of protection. That's what the Geneva Convention says. It doesn't matter whether you're a communist country or a democratic country, you're entitled to the same protection. So what we really need is to first remove our cultural agendas from a safety and security agenda. Otherwise, you lose people. Right? Because you use that Athenian project to also interfere in your fellow democracies. Elon Musk wants to change the government of Germany today because he doesn't like the German democracy as it exists today. So let's not mix culture with the strategic objective of securing our digital future. So I think first of all,
let me just be totally clear. We were happy to protect any organization that's out there. The Athenian project is specifically set up because when you do have voting, you have to actually be.
I'm following that project.
So
I get it.
We're not. This isn't a philosophical.
But all I'm saying is the political establishment of all regimes should be respected.
Sure.
If you want your elections not to be interfered with, then don't call color revolutions in 10 other parts of the world, in Latin America and Europe. My point here is, if you want political respect for your systems, you have to respect other political systems as well. You are not the wisest people in the world. Let others decide their own political outcomes. Let's look at the functional element of protecting digital spaces, and therefore, then norms work. The problem with getting a global agreement on norms and rules for cyberspace was that you always infused it with cultural and political agendas, which was not useful. Yeah. And therefore, we should look at. I'm not saying we should not defend democracy.
No, I think that's a very valid.
But defending democracy is a separate topic. Again, I agree with Matthew. Don't let it enter your country. I mean, look, you can stop TikTok. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? You can ban TikTok. We ban TikTok. We are not poorer. We are as crazy as before. We never lost. We didn't lose our craziness.
India banned TikTok in 22.
We banned TikTok. We love Reels, and we are as crazy on Reels as you are on TikTok. But my point here is that at least the Chinese are not gaming our system, and they're not privileging certain content during our elections versus other content. So what I'm trying to say is we can defend democracy different ways. Now let's look at the critical infrastructure that needs to be protected, and all countries need equal guarantees. And that's the point.
But look, isn't that exactly the issue which we are talking about? Come back to what you said earlier with the generational topic. If if tanks are going into a territory, will be noticed quickly, because of the territorial nature. The whole cyberspace is extraterritorial in nature. It doesn't really matter, from what place you're going to do this. So it's extraterritorial. It's outside the boundary of what human history has actually defined, the integrity of borders. So it's a notch above it. And that makes it so complicated. So at the end of the day, how would you tackle that? You would tackle it in a way that you've got a global agreement, a set of rules everybody adheres to. Right? And that's impossible because there are different interests of different territorial players. And that's a real issue. That's not just cyber. It's the whole matter of propaganda and impacting people and impacting democracies, extraterritorial in nature.
And again, I think norms are incredibly important and agreements are incredibly important. But in order for them to happen, you have to have visibility first.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we don't know what's going on clearly, that attribution is hard, that the North Koreans pretend to be the Iranians or the Iranians pretend to be the Russians, that makes it extremely difficult for us to get there. So I think step one is get visibility, and after you have visibility, then norms are more important.
The norms exist.
Yes.
The norms exist.
They're just not being followed.
Don't pretend that they're not possible, even for cyber, because international humanitarian law enshrines the principles that are valid in all religions, societies, everywhere. It's the minimum standard in warfare. They apply 100% to the cyberspace. They exist. They just need to be applied. Now, there are areas where you have to look into developing additional norms because they don't fulfill your protection needs. And that's an area that we can discuss, but don't have the time for it, autonomous weapon systems.
Correct.
But anything below, anything that concerns cyber attacks, even on your companies, is covered by the
international
conventions. You just need to apply it.
Commissioner, how do you do that?
We see very clearly the situation. Norms are followed by, let's say, normal democracies. But norms are not followed by some, aggressive countries or, some groups and so on and so on. So
I disagree
I'm sorry.
completely.
Yeah.
Democratic countries have shown absolute entrepreneurial energy to use them against adversaries and better.
Good.
And they are better at misusing it.
I think Samir is making the point I was
Let's be
gonna
honest here. I'm coming from the most vibrant one, and I'm telling you, if we have the ability to use it, we will. So I do not defend democracies as being some virtuous saints here. We have seen democracies flout norms often.
Yeah,
and the United States and Europe have been champions at it.
Yeah, okay, good. We're jumping into another, topic. But, I am not so sure that, when we're talking about the norms and ability for us to, to convince everybody to follow the norms, that this is, exactly a solution, which, of course, that would be ideal solution, that we're writing the norms and then everybody is following them. We are facing different, development. We need to understand we have freedoms, like information freedom, like communication freedom, like election freedom, Some guys, bad guys, are using our freedoms, for very bad purposes. That's the reality.
Completely.
So, and that's what, you continued my topics, that, one thing is territorial occupation, but we see very clearly that with all that, what I called new generation warfare, which goes from propaganda to real war, adversaries are trying, first of all, to occupy the hearts and minds of our people. And this is much more difficult to defend. If you
agree.
Yeah, that's
Commissioner, we have agreement.
Yeah,
we have
good.
to defend democracy by using a simple principle of reciprocity. If the Chinese don't allow us to post on their social media, they should not be allowed to post on ours. Reciprocity should be the principle of the digital future. If we allow their embassies in our country, we should be allowed our embassies in theirs. The same is true for the digital spaces. If they prevail in ours, we must prevail in theirs. And that is the deterrence without which it will be a perverse and asymmetric field.
And with that, we're out of time. It's kind of magical that we have disagreement and then agreement, but such, that's what happens when you bring a good panel together. Thank you to all of you for joining us. Thanks for watching wherever you are. We'll see you later.